The last week of PC hardware news is absolutely crazy. We have President Trump announcing 100% tariff on computer chips that are not produced within the US. At this point, we're just going to need to monitor this as a developing story to see which products that this ends up, raising the prices on, or which, companies this ends up helping, because even TSMC does have some US-based facilities. Does this help out Intel, who's currently in a bit of a death spiral? At least it appears to be. But again, there's US national interest in having the US-based company. Gamers Nexus has a great video with a lot of the details of what's been going on with Intel, but then we have announcements like the Intel CEO not only being called out directly by President Trump as maybe wanting him to be fired, but now he's going to have a visit with the White House today, and we'll have to see if any announcements comes out of that. And we also have some AI GPUs to China, restrictions being at least somewhat lifted for certain models. But with I don't remember seeing anything like this, a revenue share with the US government, apparently 15%. For H20 chips, also stating may do this for Blackwell, but it would be a lesser version of the most powerful Blackwell chips. The point is there's a lot of absolute craziness going on there, but a lot of that's kind of the bigger picture business side of things. For my gaming audience, we'll have to kind of see just what happens to prices at the consumer level. But if you've been looking at AMD GPUs, one thing you've probably been monitoring is what's going on with FSR Redstone, which is promised for this year, somewhere in the second half. Now, we did get an AMD post talking about FSR Redstone in the context of an FSR 3.1.4 UE 5.6 plugin. So to be clear, the FSR 3.1.4 upgrade already happened. So what's new here is it's being released as a Unreal Engine 5.6 plugin, which makes it easier to integrate into those games. But the interesting thing here is FSR Redstone being called out as a major part of this. More on this in a second, but first, so many of you are making a huge mistake when upgrading your PC gaming setup, not thinking enough about the chair you'll be sitting in the whole time, and frankly, what some of you are doing is a bit embarrassing. What you need is a high-quality ergonomic office chair like the Flexispot C7M that Flexispot recently sent me, and a huge thanks to Flexispot for sponsoring this part of today's video. In fact, this is actually my second C7M since my mother-in-law claimed my first one because after trying it out, she wanted one specifically for napping due to the comfortable adjustment and the footrest. Your back will thank you so much for upgrading to a Flexispot ergonomic office chair, and the C7M has all the features you need. A mesh back solves those sweaty long gaming sessions, and adjustable height armrest solves the annoying problem where you get a chair that can't actually sit flush with your desk or reach an appropriate height for reaching your mouse and keyboard comfortably. The Flexispot C7M armrests have a truly impressive range of motion, allowing them to rotate forward, backward, inside, and outside to get into perfect position, and unlike most office chairs, I can rotate the arms far enough out of the way to play my guitar comfortably. There is also an adjustable height back, adaptive lumbar support, which your back will thank you for, and a 3D adjustable headrest. The seat itself can move forward and backward, and the footrest is perfect for when you want to recline for some controller-based gaming. With a 30-day return policy and 10-year warranty with direct replacement for damaged parts, there's no reason not to check out the sponsored link in the video description or pinned comment to upgrade to a Flexispot ergonomic office chair today. Your back will thank you. Also, if you have a limited budget, check out their C5 chair, which also has good build quality and tons of adjustment. So what is the big deal with AMD's FSR Redstone anyway? Let's get a quick reminder. So the main idea is that AMD released FSR 4, which is their machine learning-based super resolution upscaler, supported on their 9000 series cards, but it was only one part of a larger machine learning-based upgrade to a lot of their features, targeting a lot of future gaming technologies. There's a lot of this is probably being developed along with Sony for their upcoming PlayStation 6 with their Project Amethyst. Anyway, they've talked about things like taking path tracing to become more viable on AMD hardware by taking your path tracing scene, which has low frame rates, adding in things like neural radiance caching with a machine learning-based model, adding in machine learning-based ray regeneration, which is a a denoiser along the lines of NVIDIA's ray reconstruction. We have a similar naming scheme here as well. Then we have the FSR machine learning super resolution, which we already have. That's FSR 4. And then they're also looking at a machine learning based frame generation, which is different than the current FSR frame generation, which is not machine learning based, and theoretically would improve the image quality. Again, we have yet to actually see that released. So that's the idea behind FSR Redstone. However, some interesting notes here in this FSR 3.1.4 Unreal Engine 5.6 plugin here is some notes about this. Because, for example, it says that FSR 3.1.4 also adds the required camera parameters to support machine learning frame generation, which is part of FSR Redstone. So, in other words, it's looking like a lot of these features are going to require certain amounts of game integration to support. And one of those things being the machine learning based frame generation, which apparently requires certain camera based stuff. So this 3.1.4 UE 5.6 plugin seems like if you get that in there, then you should be able to then have those games support this FSR Redstone technology, which again, for now, we just have the second half of 2025 as a release date. I'm really hoping we get that soon and are able to test it out. And again, right now we're having the issue with a lot of the FSR 4 that we have currently, even before we get the rest of Project Redstone, is the game support list. Now, AMD has been adding game support through the driver, but they do require a driver whitelist if you're not trying to mod in support using things like Optiscaler, which I've talked about on the channel. However, interestingly, when I was mentioning that the Battlefield 6 open beta didn't have FSR 4 in it, I had some comments mentioning something called an AMD GPU profile manager, which allows you to whitelist games that are not whitelisted, specifically highlighting Battlefield 6's open beta as something you could do this in. Now, this is really interesting, and I might want to do a dedicated video checking this out on the channel because, yeah, this appears to be something that just allows you to whitelist games that AMD has not whitelisted yet to enable that driver toggle for FSR 4. Now, this is super interesting. Now, personally, I would be a little bit scared doing this in games with anti-cheat, although this, to me at least, sounds less likely to flag the game than something like Optiscaler, where Optiscaler I know is actually modifying game files. This appears to be more about just telling the GPU driver it's okay to enable the FSR 4 support. Now, what I would really like to see from AMD is something along these lines officially. Right now, you have to wait for a game to get a driver update to achieve the support. For example, Cyberpunk 2077 several weeks ago got an FSR 4 upgrade to the game itself, but you couldn't actually enable it on any official drivers from AMD until we got 25.8.1 just a few days ago. So you kind of have that lag in the wait time. So if we had something like this profile manager allow you to upgrade that sooner, that's cool. But I would kind of like AMD to just have a feature in their drivers that just says, it flashes a warning saying that AMD has not whitelisted this game yet, but you can try it at your own risk. Maybe the game will crash, maybe there'll be other issues, maybe it won't work properly. Just put up the proper warning and then just allow us to do it anyway. I think that would be the right way to go about this, in my opinion. Now, keep in mind that this still is going to be more limited in its application than something like Optiscaler, where Optiscaler can take games that do not have FSR 3.1, which is required for the driver level AMD FSR 4 override to work. And I think that this profile manager would still require the game to have that later version of FSR. Whereas Optiscaler can take games that just have DLSS, for example, and don't even have any FSR in them at all, and just take the DLSS inputs and then run it through the FSR4 algorithm. So I don't see this as being some kind of a replacement for OptiScaler, but it is something that's interesting. And again, I would like to see AMD just be a little more lenient on allowing games that have the proper version of FSR 3.1 at least to be able to just use it without being whitelisted, along with maybe a warning. But anyway, there's other big AMD news. We have an RX 9060 non-XT officially announced on AMD's website, advertised for native 1080p ultra settings gaming. Now, videocards.com helpfully has a specs sheet lineup here with the 9060 included, so we can see how cut down it is compared to the XT version. It has 1,792 cores compared to 2,048, so it is noticeably, but not like massively cut down. You'd expect to have lower performance. Also lower boost clocks at 2.99 gigahertz instead of 3.13. It still has 8 gigabytes of GDDR6 memory, and those memory speeds seem to be down to 18 gigabits per second as opposed to the 20 gigabits per second on the 9060 XT, reducing the memory bandwidth to 288 gigabytes per second as opposed to 320 gigabytes per second, and the max board power down to 132 instead of 150. Now, officially there's no price on this because it's just going to be included in OEM system integrator builds rather than being available on the DIY market. However, these things sometimes turn up as, used GPUs on eBay or something like that. So it's useful to know that if you see it RX 9060, don't assume it's the XT version now. There is a non-XT version, even if you haven't seen a bunch of reviews on it or something like that, because it's an OEM part that's sort of just being slipped into the market quietly. So just be aware of that, and these are the specs, so expect somewhat decreased in performance, although not drastically so compared to the 9060 XT 8 gigabyte version. Anyway, if they start to be sold on the mass market, I might try to get a hold of one to review, but if they're just OEM parts that are pretty limited availability, I'm more on the DIY side of things, so might not end up getting one. But actually, interestingly, AMD is apparently also slipping in a new RX 7400. Now, this would be a much lower end part, and it's being spotted in Dell builds. Now, this seems to be basically the same type of specs as coming from the Radeon Pro W7400, but is a Radeon card, so it's more of the gaming branded rather than workstation branded part. Now, this is pretty significantly cut down compared to like a 7600. And once again, videocards.com has a very helpful table. By the way, all my sources will be linked in the video description if you want to follow up on all of these things, where you can see how this stacks up compared to the rest of the lineup. So actually kind of noticeably cut down compared to the 7600, but actually in a similar manner to how our 9060 non-XT is cut down compared to the 9060 XT with the current generation, but this is 7000 series parts, so also don't expect like FSR4 support or anything like that. But this has some more significant downgrades because in addition to the the core cut, which isn't massively significant, notice that the memory speed seems to be 10.8 gigabits per second, cut down from 18. And the total board power for a RX 7600 is 165 watts. Now, there doesn't appear to be a total board power listed for the RX 7400. There's just a GPU power, which isn't the total board power. You would also need power for the memory, but that seems to be listed at 43 watts for the GPU power. So I'm wondering if this is going to be just slot powered or something like that, in which case maybe it's interesting for that type of a situation. But again, it appears to be OEM only right now, only in Dell builds. Now, in other news, I just want to just poke fun at this. Gigabyte launched a ad campaign that included the Pay Smarter branding and yet had a listing pairing a Z890 motherboard with an i5-14600K. To be clear, this is not being smart because these aren't compatible. The Z890 motherboards are not compatible with the previous generation 14600K CPUs. So that's interesting. Now, this was very quickly ridiculed and then taken down by Gigabyte, but I just wanted to include it here to poke fun of it because, wow, let's do your research on your bundle deals before you actually advertise them, Gigabyte, please. Now, in other CPU-related news, we're seeing that unfortunately the 5700X3D is apparently end of life. This appears to have been first posted by tweakers.net, which I'm machine translating here in my browser. It's not native English. But basically, they're saying that they have reached out and apparently manufacturers cannot source additional silicon for the 5700X3Ds, so that these will not be able to be sold anymore. In other words, AMD is not directly commenting here, but the retailers don't seem to be able to stock additional stock. And I've also noticed the price jump up on them, availability is low. And that's unfortunate because I've seen a lot of people playing the Battlefield 6 open beta and realizing they're CPU limited on, like, you know, you got a Ryzen 3600 or even a 5600 and wanting something faster on the platform. Well, the 5700X3D would have been a good upgrade choice without having to get a whole new motherboard or something. But unfortunately, those are now drying up. Now, in other interesting hardware news, I'm seeing it reported that LG Display has a new OLED panel that is 540 hertz 1440p, but then can switch into, you know, your 1080p esports mode at 720 hertz. That's absolutely insane. Now, if you're playing something like Battlefield 6, I haven't seen any CPUs able to keep up with that. But, you know, in other games, you know, you can see like Counter-Strike and Rainbow Six Siege and things like that. There are definitely games out there where 700 frames per second is possible. So this is certainly interesting. And with OLED panels, you're getting super high refresh rates, etc. So interesting stuff. Now, this had initially been reported as a 720p 720 hertz mode, but it has now been updated to be that it is a 1080p mode at 720 hertz, and the panel itself is native 1440p running at 540 hertz. Now, in other hardware news, it's being reported by Deal Labs. So, and, you know, trusting their sourcing, you know, so this is not completely official, that we have the release date for the ROG Xbox Ally. Now, they are reporting that it's going to be October 16th for the official release date, and that this should be officially being announced at Gamescom, which will be broadcast on August 20th. They're also claiming to know the European pricing, where the lower tier model will be at 599 euros, and the more expensive Ally X model coming in at 899 euros. These sound very expensive. I don't know, man. I'm really hoping we get a newer version of AMD's APUs that have FSR 4 support in handhelds, because oftentimes they end up having to rely on upscaling, but, you know, the older upscaling algorithms don't look real great to me. So anyway, we'll have to see what comes of that. Again, videocards.com has a nice side-by-side of the specs for these products if you're interested in the details. I'm not going to read through this all right here, but the less expensive version, which is still quite expensive, certainly does have a lot of cuts to important bits, including like the RDNA 2 GPU being cut down to 8 CUs from 16. So like literally half the compute units in the GPU and the memories cut down, etc. So do keep your eye on all this. Again, sources will be linked in the video description if you want to take a deeper look at any of this. Now, there's a whole bunch of new GPU cooler models being announced, some of them quite expensive, like the Noctua GPU RTX 5080 collaboration with Asus. Now, this apparently they declined to comment on what the pricing would be, but videocards.com is saying that they were able to source a retailer listing it for £1,500, so that's quite expensive. And that is was that at Scan UK? I don't remember. Yeah, retailer at Scan. Now, there's some other GPUs out here. We've got Manly launching an RTX 5070, 5060 Ti, and 5060 Black Stellar GPUs, so maybe take a look at those designs, see if that's up your alley. We have Zephyr unveiling an RTX 5060 Ti Sakura Snow X with full CNC aluminum shroud. This looks targeted at ITX builds, so pretty small there. And we have Asus formally launching the GeForce RTX 5080 ProArt with wood-patterned laminate trim and a USB Type-C port. It's been a while since I've seen USB Type-C ports for display on GPUs. So, I mean, maybe I've missed some, but that's certainly not super common these days. So if that's something you're looking for, maybe this will fit your interests, along with maybe the wood laminate matching. A lot of case design recently has had wood finishes, so this could fit into that type of a build. We also have the RTX 5070 Ti expert design from MSI now joining the 5080, which already had an expert design. And I still don't know how I feel about the expert designs, but honestly, a lot of these are, totally, it's subjective personal preference on the designs. I feel like I almost like the expert design, but it ends up looking like a slightly less sleek version of the Founders Edition, where it's like, kind of looks like Founders Edition, but just not quite as good to my eye, but that's personal preference. Now, I've been interested if we could get any additional information on what version of DLSS is going on in the Nintendo Switch 2. Also, there's been a lot of controversy around how do developers get a Nintendo Switch 2 dev kit, because a lot of them seem to be being denied by Nintendo. Anyway, I'm seeing it reported at WCCF Tech, although they seem to be sourcing the information from a YouTube video from Linksbyte Games discussing what developers have. The YouTube video was discussing with the developer Linksbyte Games. The video seems to be by Dr. 81. Anyway, apparently Nintendo Switch 2 dev kits need to be proven that your game is going to be actually taking advantage of the Nintendo Switch 2 hardware, including things like supporting 4K 60 or 120 FPS at 1440p in docked mode, or implementing game chat, mouse controls, HD Rumble 2, etc. But what I was more interested in this video is that apparently they're saying that Nvidia DLSS 3.1 is supported. Now, what's weird though is when you look at places like Digital Foundry, who have analyzed the image quality of Switch 2 games where developers have stated they are using DLSS, and you look at the image quality of the DLSS, it doesn't seem to be as high quality in many cases as what you get when you run the PC version of the game using DLSS at the same kinds of internal rendering resolutions and output resolutions. So it's interesting that they're saying that this is some version of DLSS 3.1, but it really does, image quality-wise, appear to be something different, at least in certain games. So I still want more information on what exactly is going on with the DLSS version in the Nintendo Switch 2. Anyway, in other interesting news, we do have Ubisoft saying that they are making a Far Cry TV series with FX. However, this apparently hadn't been supposed to have been announced yet. It was briefly posted to their website and then redacted. However, of course, Redditors had already got a hold of it and posted information. Now, apparently each season will include a different world and cast of characters, following how the video game franchise isn't building a continuous storyline, but it's standalone storytelling. So it's also unclear, and probably wouldn't, in my estimation, follow the story from a specific game. It might be more that they would take the the format of the game stories and their themes and just make their own new stories. There's also some pretty big names apparently associated with this, with Boykin, from head of Ubisoft's film and television division, being quoted as saying, "This collaboration is really an embarrassment of riches. Far Cry is a psychological tailspin that doesn't shy away from the darkest and most absurd parts of humanity, which aligns perfectly with FX's bold and fearless storytelling." And apparently the names involved with this is, we have It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia co-star and co-creator Rob Mack, and Noah Hawley, who is the creator and writer behind FX's Fargo series and the soon-to-debut at the time of this writing Alien Earth series. taking on the show running, and Rob Mack, I think, would be an actor involved probably in the first season of this. Anyway, there's a lot of big names behind this. It's interesting. We've also seen that Ubisoft is developing an Assassin's Creed show with, is that one with Amazon, I believe? Also with a big name showrunner, so curious stuff. Now, I was also just interested in this because I'm a huge Dragon Age Origins fan and had been still trying to see if there's any hope for the series moving forward and maybe getting back to Dragon Age Origins itself. But apparently, there had been remakes of Origins pitched to EA along with, Dragon Age 2 and 3. But apparently EA had shot them down and just not been interested in remakes of the originals, which is, I don't know, like the Dragon Age Origins is not in great shape on PC last time I checked regarding like just if you try to just buy it and run it, it can crash quite a bit and need some mod support and things like that. So this would be a case where I think a remake, getting it up and running better, and if we get graphics updates and stuff, cool, would have been nice to see, but we didn't get it. And again, don't forget about your chair situation and take advantage of Flexispot's 9th anniversary sale with the premium ergonomic office chair C7 using my code. Remember, other price ranges are available here. You have the C7 Morpher, but you also have the standalone office chair C5 at $200 on sale right now. Again, take advantage of those. Check the link in the video description and/or pinned comment. Use my code for awesome discounts here, and I hope all of you have an excellent day.